Hi, you all. I am Barry. I run Podcast in Color, the directory and all the social media. That is all me, Barry. And I think I wanted to do this today because usually we would have in-person events or something where, we can talk or do things. And without that, I'm like, there's so many conversations people don't have access to. And I love talking to Twila and Renay about different things. So I just thought it would be fun for us to do a thing together. Either one of you
Twi-
all can.
Twila, you
Yeah.
go.
Okay. Hi, everybody.
Mhm.
I'm Twila Dang. I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Power to the people. And I run a company called Matriarch Digital Media. It is a women-centered, women-focused media company. Our primary product right now is podcasts, and we have a very specific and simple mission. We are changing the way the world talks to and talks about women and girls. I'm here today because I'm quite literally looking at two of the smartest women in this industry, and the fact that they like to have regular conversations with me included is the most fun and also the most awesome thing. So I learned far more than I probably contribute to these conversations, but I'm happy to be here. And that's me in a nutshell.
And then I'm Renay. I am the CEO and founder of Broccoli Content. It's a podcast production company. The kind of reason I started Broccoli was because I wanted to make paid opportunities for minority talent in front and behind the mic. Last week, I also created this equality in audio pact, and I haven't checked today, but yesterday we had over like around 220 companies signed up, including two of the major broadcasters in the UK, BBC and Bauer. And then in America, we've had Gimlet, Transmitter Media, Matriarch, obviously, Third Coast, areas. So yeah, it's kind of spreading. We've got Australian sign-ups, French sign-ups, Germany sign-ups. So yeah, that's happening. That's it.
Wow. Did you mean okay? So I mean, I didn't know about that before. I'm not hating or anything, but I found out on social media. Um, did you how big did you plan on doing it? My mind, I would say to start this off, usually in podcasting, I can say that I do think probably smaller than I should. I think of more the US type of things, and sometimes I think of UK, but I don't necessarily. There's so much different parts to that. Did you think just the US and the UK when you thought about that, or you were just really trying to do anybody that you could around?
I don't know, because well, maybe you don't know. I have worked in US and UK podcasting. I just needed to do something. It was the week of George Floyd's death, and seeing that video of Amy Cooper as well in the park, and the experiences I've had in podcasting so far, it's some of the worst experiences I've had in my whole career. And this is just the last 5 years, but I've done already 20 years maybe 15 years in film and television, but I found podcasting the absolute worst, audio the worst. So with the Black Lives Matter movement and just seeing Amy Cooper, invoke her white supremacy, power, I needed to do something myself. So I think I just assumed I'd get 25 companies, maybe if I was lucky, at the end of the week. And I assumed a good maybe 10 of them I would know. And then maybe I'd get 15 strangers. And it was by the end of the first day, we had 50. And I was like, oh my God, this is actually, I don't know. Do you know when you're just in it, and you're like, oh my God, we're getting momentum. Let's just keep acting people and targeting them then, because people are really resonating with people. So by each day, we were just let's just target another big one then. And so when we went after the BBC, people internally were also emailing saying it's important. And then 3 days in, we had the BBC, and I was like, we would never get the BBC.
Listen, I just loved how you were putting the stuff out on Twitter, and you were like, yeah, I'm talking to you. And it was every single one was just I'm talking to you. And I was just watching. For every, you would put it in. And then by the time I went back to check in midday, I'd be like, yeah, she got them. And it was just it was so beautiful. It was beautiful.
There's some people I stand. I feel like you've talked about it before this, but like I love Greta of Transmitter, here the production company. And so when I saw that she had signed, I was like, okay, Renay is getting the smaller people too. Like, I mean, not necessarily smaller, just probably in the name of what people know. Of course, they make big podcasts and things like that, but just, as a smaller production company that is like growing, I was like, okay, so everybody kind of sees what Renay is doing. Like, that made me proud.
But that thing as well is like Transmitter are already doing the 5 things. Well, the middle one, point 3, was for bigger companies, but they were already doing it. But the fact is that even if you're doing it already, if you just support it, you amplify it, and it means that we're all like kind of for this. And so it was kind of wild. It's still going on. It's wild.
They said we were talking about. Did she say? Can we explain what we're talking about?
Yes.
We were talking about the thing. I'll let Renay explain.
Yeah. So there's the equality. I'm going to bring up the exact points there are. So it's the equality in audio pact that me and Broccoli, which is my company, we made up 5 points because we were just kind of sick of how our experience, we've all got collected different experiences within audio, and a lot of them are bad. And we wanted to come up with 5 points. We were like, this whole, racism, white supremacy, not treating like Black and brown people as human beings, just hiring minorities for certain roles, not hiring us, the whole power structure of audio being white and like men. We just wanted to do like 5 steps that every company could do. So the 5 steps are, number 1, pay interns / no longer use unpaid interns. Number 2 is hire LGBTQIA+ Black people, people of color, and other minorities on projects not only related to their identity. Point number 3 is, if you are a company that releases gender pay gap reports, release the race pay gap data at the same time. Sorry, loud motorbike. Number 4 is no longer participate in panels that are not representative of the cities, towns, and industries they take place in. And number 5 is be transparent about the people who works for your company, as well as their role, position, and permanency. And the reason behind all of those was we need to, in order for audio to get better, we need to be able to see exactly what it is. And these things were about being open and honest and transparent about who works for you, what shows you hire people for, and also if with the pay one, with the point 1 pay interns, it's opening up to who can enter the industry. They're really like literally step 1, but if every company did all those 5 things in a year, the industry would look different, the content would look different, the people in the industry would look different. So it's kind of a thing that I decided last week to help us get a little bit closer to equality.
And I like that. I mean, it was smart. Did you guys do that as a company?
Yeah, so I went in on the Monday and I had 2 points, which was pay interns, and then point 2. And the 3, there's 5 of us at Broccoli, so it's me, Hannah, B, Tony, and Jar Jar. They came up with the other 3, and we really workshopped it because we didn't want anything like that's a hope. So yes, diversify leadership, obviously. But the BBC have had that on their mission statement for like 15 years. And it's like, don't be racist, obviously. And like, don't be ageist, things like that. But they're hopes. They're not like things you can do today. And you can.
Things they're going to do and how they hire.
Yeah, you won't stamp out racism today. But do you know what you can do today is hire a Black person, a person of color, a minority in a role that's not just about their identity. You can see them as a human being, that they have interests in other things that you can do today. So we kind of didn't put, it's not a big like hope thing. It's you can do this today and it will make a change tomorrow.
Okay, so to back up a little bit so people understand who you are, like, in the bigger stream of things. I'll start with Renay on this, but you have Broccoli. Can you tell us about creating, because a lot of people are like, I'm going to create a podcast network. I'm trying to secure the bag. I'm trying to, start podcasts under my thing and things like that. So can you tell us how you created Broccoli and then how you actually became a person that could secure the bag with your podcast company.
Okay, so I started Broccoli 2018, 2 years ago. It was the year I went freelance. I had worked for before that Acast, Audible, and Panoply. Two of those. Well, Acast forced me out. I was difficult, and Audible didn't renew my contract because I just complained about their stupid. Like they were just a mess. And Panoply, obviously, I complained again about because I just felt I was their only Black employee on their editorial team, and they had people from Slate, but as Panoply, I was the only one. I was based in London, and they just kept using me as like the Black, like literally anything. Oh, ask Renay, like, oh, we're doing a project about a guy who does crack in Brooklyn. Hey, Renay will know. It's like, will I? But that's what it was. I had never felt so Black in my life. And after that, like after they got rid of me, I was like, do you know what? I'm never gonna be in that position again. So throughout the time when I was at Panoply, I was working with Renay Lodge, who's a writer. She wrote this book called Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. I had actually approached her before the book came out because she'd had an essay of the same name. And I was like, we need to make a show with her about race. And Panoply were like, oh, does she really not talk to white people about race? First question, stupid. And then they were like, afterwards, they were like, oh, it's a bit broccoli, like, it's good for you, but no one wants to eat it. They also had said we need to make it to target it towards a white audience. They had also said that we couldn't make it about race in the UK because Americans don't listen to that. And basically, me and Renay knew that show was not for them. And when I was let go, Renay had tried to email me and my email bounced back and she DM'd me on Twitter. She was like, what happened? We went out for like a drinks and I told her everything that happened. And then she was like, I still want to make the podcast. So we got luckily in the UK, there's the Arts Council and we got a grant to make the podcast. When I made that, I literally put all my eggs in the basket. I was like, this has to be as good, the best I can make it because this podcast is going to generate work. And basically it did. And from then I was speaking to my friend AC Valdez, who's based in DC, and I was telling him the broccoli story. He was like, you should name your company that. And I was like, I should. So I did. And then basically I started my company. And the first thing I did was, obviously register it, but get an accountant. And then I just used, because of About Race was so like kind of, it caused quite a stir in the UK. I was getting job opportunities. And so it's just, I just grew it like that way, basically, by just I maybe took on too many podcasts, but I just was like, I need to work, I need to make everything. So I did.
So you're saying on that part, you were just doing independent projects outside of Broccoli to generate money so that you could put things back into Broccoli and make more podcasts.
Yeah, basically. Okay. I basically just took on, I was like getting paid for my services. So Broccoli was getting paid for my services. So I took a salary from Broccoli, but I was making all the podcasts in order to be able to, the hope was one day just be completely independent and be able to make shows myself. So in order to do that, I needed to earn money that needed to go back into Broccoli.
Did you, just as a question, when you decided to work for other companies, did you have to have a cosign or like, how did you get into that? Because I believe you've worked with Spotify. Like there's things I want to say, I'm like, wait, is that
So Berry knows, I love meeting Black podcasters and Black producers via Twitter. And one of them that I had met was Joss Gwynn via Twitter at Pineapple Street. He works at Pineapple Street. And basically a project had come in, and this is when I was like just gone freelance. A project had come in with them and they needed a producer and he suggested me and I got the job.
So networking is part of it.
So networking, Twitter guys, Twitter. All about Twitter. Yeah.
Okay, and then last before I go to Twila and ask some questions, can you tell us about how you got hooked into the Sony deal and like talking to them and them picking you?
So basically when Acast let me go, before I got my job at Audible do really long like checks because it's like an Amazon company and I guess Amazon deals with money, so Audible are really strict or whatever. But basically the period that between knowing I was gonna get the job and starting was 3 months. And I was like, I don't know who they think I am, but I can't not work for 3 months. So I was a temp, and I ended up temping at Sony Music as an assistant, like just in the legal department. But when I was there, I was just constantly talking about podcasts because I just worked at Acast and I knew I was going to Audible, but I just didn't know exactly when. So I was just talking about podcasts the whole time. And so throughout the years, since then, every time someone was making a podcast, they'd be like, oh, you should talk to Renay. So I would just constantly be popping in, talking about podcasts, or they'd email me like, hi, Renay, this artist wants to start a podcast. Do you know any producers, blah, blah, blah. And that's how they just I was kind of around. It was basically Columbia Music mostly, but I was basically around because I literally worked there as an assistant, well, a temp. And when About Race came out, the guy who kind of is doing the podcast now, he had listened to the show, so wanted to work with me. And it kind of spiraled from there.
So I just want to do the basis of like, networking isn't always like 1, 2, 3, I made it. It's more, it can sometimes be like, I met that person 5 years ago, and like we just kind of circled around each other until it was supposed to actually come together, or something came where they were like, you know what, we're doing this now.
Yeah, exactly. It was literally, I was a temp. It was completely unrelated. It was just that I was just talking about podcasts the whole time. And which I guess makes a difference for them, because everyone normally who works at a record label wants to work in music. And I was like, podcast, you should be doing podcasts. And yeah, so then years later, when they did get into podcasting, they were like, oh, there's this girl, Renay, who's been around the whole time. Let's speak to her and let's develop some shows with her. And then I think then Sony they knew they were in the works of the 3 Uncanny 4 deal, and they were just the UK team were like, oh, you should meet this guy from America. And I was like, okay. I googled him and I was like, oh, this guy's quite important. So I went and met him and spoke to him, and they basically asked me what I wanted, like what my actual dreams were, not what I wanted from them, because I didn't know the meeting was about that. They said, what do I want to be? And I said, I want to be Shonda Rhimes. And basically I said, I want to make Broccoli a multifaceted company that, you know, podcast, publishing. I have a background of TV, so TV, all those things. And they were like, can we make you an offer at the end? And I was like, bloody hell.
How did you decide the amount? I feel like that's really big on me, is like asking for the, you know, the amount that you should be asking for.
I will be honest that this is not my world. And I will tell you exactly what I asked for, because I had a business plan, because I had my old boss, he had like been interested in podcasts. When I worked in TV and I had gone for coffee with him, he was like, you should write a business plan. So I did. I wanted 300 grand because I was like, I can hire one person and then I can, you know, make one show and then one marketing thing, basically. That I was small fry. I'm not in this world, because I'm black. Like, black people don't get invested in podcasting.
We can, if you give me a little bit, I can make it happen. Let me make it happen.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It's like, just that seemed loads for me. But then when they made me the offer, it was way more, and I was like, okay, so I don't even know what the white people get. Because like
it breaks my heart, because it breaks my heart. It only breaks my heart a little bit, because conceivably when you walked in the room and you said that to them and they saw the dollar signs, they actually would have given you the stupid money. They would have given you money in the millions, and you wouldn't have, if you were a white guy in chinos who walked in and said, I have an idea on a cocktail napkin, he walks out with no less than $2 to $3 million. I met some venture folks, and the one piece of advice everyone gave me in every room was, oh, you never ask for less than 2 million. And I was like, what are you talking about? And they're like, you just like, listen, 2 million is just like the price of admission. That's like, they expect that. If you don't ask that, they think you don't have vision. And I was like, that's the kind of thing that white people know, that they tell other white people that we don't know, because we don't even live in that realm. And the worst part is, we will get in those rooms and ask for the money like they tell us to, and they'll look at us and be like, yeah, right. but that's
still raises the bar of us not.
But I will say,
but the chasm in what we normally ask for. I mean, there was just a study yesterday that said Black women business owners in the United States average about 24,000 in actual earned income or revenue for their business, and white women founders, same industries, same sort of playing field or area, get average about 143,000. So that just tells you we're not being, even when we're doing the work, people aren't investing us, buying into our products, things like that, because we have brown faces. It's not fair. But
I will say, Sony did make me a handsome offer. They ignored they basically ignored what I said because they're like, this girl doesn't know what she's doing.
Right. What they realized is they know what they're buying into, because but that's tremendous that they looked at you and said, hey, she's like, we want to be attached to her. And we know what we would normally offer in this circumstance, and we're going to offer her that in this circumstance, because they absolutely could have done what I've seen people do again and again. They could have taken a big chunk of your equity. They could have taken your creative IP, as a part of like a sweetheart deal, and then you don't actually have control of the things that you create. So that's an They made an investment. They didn't just make an offer. They made a full-on investment, and
it was a proper thing. But it just opened my eyes to like, because when I was doing the actual deal, I was like, I don't even have anyone to ask because I don't know anyone who's done this, and it just showed me. I was like, wow, this is.
If you would have sent me a message, I would have sent a message to Jenna. Like, you can talk directly to Jenna.
No, but what I watched. But I watched that Theranos documentary like 10 times, and I watched Fire Festival 5 because I was like, I need to know what these people are doing. Because I was like,
some type of thing.
I was like, I need to get in that mindset. But I did watch it 10 times, the Theranos one, because I was like, I need to understand how people get money.
Okay, but you understand that's not about money. That was just about psychosis. Like, she was actually a sociopath.
No, she was bad. But I think, normally, like with other businesses and podcasts, just businesses in general, you only hear the look at us, we're a success, blah blah blah. Look, those two documentaries went deep into how they actually got the money and things like that because they failed. If it was a success, they would just skim over the how they raised the money and things like that. So that's why I watched it, because I was like, we don't get that detail anywhere else, because everyone's a success and they try and like skim over it.
So note to
self,
self,
it just seemed like it happened.
Yeah, exactly.
Note to self, people, watch the failures, because that's where you learn.
That's how you learn.
I look at things. Like, it's so funny you say that way. Like, I'm about looking at. I feel like that's how I've been able to figure out things in podcasting before people would tell me. Is I would look at the backwards of things, like a podcast failed, they stopped, this network stopped updating this podcast, or they're gonna let it go, but most of the time they would say numbers or something at the end that people would notice. They'd be like, they're canceling our show, but we were getting 20,000 a week or something, or they're canceling our show because of these things. And so if I paid attention to that, it was easier to say, oh, okay, that network won't take you, or if you get below 40,000 or something like that, they're not necessarily looking for you anymore. Like, that ain't even it. So it's way easier. That's why I've always told people, when they're trying to join a podcast network, or if they want to be on a podcast network, to me the best thing is to look at what shows they've canceled before, and that can tell you a lot more about what they're doing as a podcast network, or what their expectations might be overall. Because I remember most people, I started paying attention to Gimlet when they had a whole mess with a podcast. I want to say it was Mystery Show or something like that, about canceling.
Harley Show.
And like, there was like a whole thing, and I was like, oh, I like podcast drama. I still do. So I was like, oh, let me figure what this is going on. And I was like, oh, okay, we got messages on Facebook. We got people not saying anything. And that was back when it was smaller on Twitter as far as podcasting in the industry. So a lot of people would say stuff because it didn't matter. Nobody's really paying attention to them. Like, they would just fire off stuff like whatever. Now people would never say some of the things they said back then. But like, that's just how I've learned a lot of things. Okay, so going over, thank you for telling me about how you started Broccoli. Let's talk about Matriarch. So you're in Minneapolis, and that's one of the things that I do like talking to the both of you all, because neither of you all are necessarily in the hot spot, which is New York or LA at this point, type of things, but in figuring out a way to do it. But you're in Minneapolis, of course, where a lot of things are happening right now.
Absolutely.
But even before that, how did you necessarily think about starting Matriarch? What was the start of it, I guess? Tell us about that.
Well, Matriarch actually rolled out of, I wish I had a more ambitious idea in mind you know, like Renay, like when I first talked to Renay and she said, I want to be Shonda Rhimes, I was like, girl, I get it. I was like, I wasn't that ambitious. I was at, so I was a stay-at-home mom for a long time. I've got 3 kids. It was time for me to go back to work. And I was gonna happily like get a job in the cafeteria where my kids, you know, go to school, or I was gonna, you know, be the one at the window says, you want fries with that? I was trying to stay on a schedule that helped with them. And I've been out of the workforce for a really long clip of time, like almost 12 years. So I was at a luncheon and I made a joke in front of a group of women who were friends of mine. And I said, you know, I'm glad I know all these professional women. The only thing I'm good at is talking, and nobody pays me to do that. And we laughed. And a couple of weeks later, a very good friend of mine called and said, you know, you made that joke at lunch and I didn't think it was funny. At the time, she was a radio host. And I thought, oh crap, I offended her. I didn't mean to offend you. And she said, no, that's not what I mean. I mean, I think you'd be really good at this and you should meet my boss. So she introduced me to her boss, who was a program director of a talk station here in the Twin Cities that was about to become the first pop culture talk radio station in the country. And I met her boss, and within 7 months, I had an on-air job. So then I did that job. I hosted shows and did, you know, basically off-book producing for 4 years. Because what you find out really quickly in radio is they want talent to stay talent, and they don't want you to branch out and do other things. They don't really like it when people have a lot of sort of different tools in their toolbox. One, because you start getting ambitious and wanting more things. And then 2, most of these media environments are made successful by an overall understanding or an overall air of competition and scarcity. If you're afraid of your job, you're not going to show somebody else how to do their job. You're not going to show anybody else how to do your job that you're doing. You're not going to mentor. You're not going to help support. So I worked at a place for 4 years where a lot of people didn't really want to tell me a lot about how to do the job or how to get better at it. But I just hung out a lot and I asked a lot of questions, and I, you know, played on the equipment in the empty rooms. And after 4 years, I figured out one very specific thing about media, and particularly audio and radio. So when Renay tells you stories about how bad radio can be, I understand because I lived it. Radio has a thing where it's not about you, it's about what they want to see in the chair. Doesn't matter how talented you are, doesn't matter how much time you put in, doesn't matter what good results you've given them. If they want a 22-year-old blonde girl in the chair, that's all they're going to look for. They will overlook you every time. So I knew it was time for me to exit. At the point at which I was looking around to exit, I had just about hit close to my 40th birthday. I was turning 40, and I had started to notice that people weren't paying attention to me. And I was starting to get really frustrated by how it felt I as a grown woman was getting treated. And I started sort of soapboxing everywhere, like, this is not fair and this is not right. And we're grown and we should be able to have this, and we should be able to be respected, and we should be able to be treated, you know, a certain way. And I soapboxed in front of the right person at the right time, who said, if you're thinking about doing something with that idea, I'd invest in it. And I was at least smart enough at the time to say yes. But much like Renay, I did not know what to ask for. I did not know how these things worked. And I asked for an obscenely low amount of money to start the business. And then just went about the business of using as little of it as possible to grow it. And just continue to say, okay, we're in it, we're going to make things. And I wanted to do things differently. I wanted to be a different kind of manager, a different kind of leader. I wanted to create an environment where women could come and work comfortably and be themselves and full and be appreciated. So from the time we started the shows, we started building shows out with revenue share built in for the talent, so that they wouldn't just be considered these hourly employees who showed up and looked cute but then go home. They're invested in the show like we're invested. Everybody that works for us and does technical work for the business gets paid. There is no unpaid interning. There is no doing me a favor. There is no, if we're even going to barter and trade services, that has to be a clear negotiation on my part to make sure that the value monetarily is there in between what I'm giving you and what you're giving me. And the business, like I said, we all know podcasts don't make money up front just being podcasts unless you're in a certain tier. So the way that we were able to make money is we were able to capitalize on the skill set of our technical staff and create a production house. So we have a creative end that makes shows under the Matriarch umbrella, and we have a production house that makes things solely for production work. There are not shows that belong to us. It's everything from consulting to editing to full-on podcast production. Whatever you need, we try to provide it. And we've been taking those funds, feeding them back into the business, and having it, be a circle that we use to sort of widen and grow the thing as we grow it. So all that to say is we've been around for 4 years now, and this has probably been, in terms of our growth, one of the most successful years we're in the middle of right now.
I didn't even ask that. So did you experience any slowdowns or stops when Corona started this year?
Yeah, we stopped because when you work with an entire staff full of women and you allow women to hold the space they need to hold, we were all freaking out, and we just needed some time. And we didn't have to be under the pressure of like, oh, let's go sort something out. As a matter of fact, we had just launched 2 shows the week before quarantine happened. So we had these 2 shows and we were like, oh crap, we can't build their numbers like we would normally build their numbers. And then we just realized, you know what, that's not important. But the most important thing is everybody okay? So we did a team call, and I just said, hey, listen, I just want to say, one, I want to make sure everybody's doing all right. Do you need something? And everybody, if you know me personally, if I ask you, do you need something? Are you okay? It does not mean give me surface answers. It does not mean I don't actually want to know. If you're my people, you're my people. And I care about what happens to you. And then I told everybody, I don't want you to worry about work right now. The work is the work. We'll always be able to get back to it. I want you to take care of yourselves. And sometimes taking care of yourself is you need a good cry, or you need to text me in the middle of the night, because I got some of those texts. Sometimes it's us eating bags of licorice and chips and, just stressing out. And then we had another get together, another set of meetings 2 weeks ago. And we just said, hey, let's break the 4th wall. Matriarch usually makes evergreen content to help empower, encourage, and uplift women. It's meant to be a support system. Women need a different kind of support right now than they normally would. Let's not pretend like that's not what's going on in the world. So we're actually back to production, and all of our shows have the opportunity to just directly address the audience and say, we all know we're going through something. In my little patch of the world, this is what I'm good at. This is what I can help you with. This is what I'm processing, and let's all work through it together. So in July, we're actually going to be launching out basically new episodes for every single one of the shows on our network that help support women right now in this sort of extraordinary time that we're in.
And then I want to bring up something I probably should have asked you about.
It's okay, you can ask me. I have no secrets.
When Corona started, and we were talking about all like the small business stuff and things like that. Yep. I do remember us doing a call. I can't remember if it was all 3 of us or if it was the 2 of us, but doing a call, and you talked about your friend. You weren't going to do it, and your friend was like, no, you should apply. You would probably, be into it. So can you talk about that? Like, did they walk you through it, or, as far as filing for, I think it was a small business loan. Is that what they called it?
Yeah. So at the time, in late March, early April in the United States, there was a couple of options. The SBA had an emergency program, an emergency grant program, and then our U.S. government had set up through the SBA a loan protection program. It's being referred to here as the PPP program, because it was meant to protect your personnel and to keep you able to keep employees on staff and pay wages. I was not going to apply for either one of them. I had not received, outside of the initial investment I had been given by the silent investor in our company. I had not been given a dime from anybody. And it wasn't for lack of trying. I would apply for things, and because we didn't sell widgets, people didn't get it. I would show up to places, and I'd be the only Black person in the room who was dealing in the business of creativity, and people were just like, podcasts are a thing? That's cute. Nobody was giving me money. No one was investing. So we had stopped attempting to get money from anywhere. So as soon as they said the business is going to line up and give money to small businesses, it was like, yeah, I'm never getting that money. And a good friend of mine said, no, you need to apply for that money, because here's the thing, the worst they can say is no. And you're used to hearing the no, and you're not afraid of it, but you're entitled to that money just like everybody else. So I applied for the SBA loan, kind of got stonewalled a little bit, and they would send this thing that said, oh, here's how it works, and here's how to walk yourself through it. And I will say the SBA initial loan was very easy to walk through, because it was really just an emergency, here's the amount. It could go up to a certain amount. I think it was 10,000 was the cap on that. The PPP loan process was much more difficult. I needed to walk through it. I actually had some friends. A lot of us were all applying for things together, and we were helping each other out. We all applied. Almost all of us universally did not get money the first or the second round, and they had to have rounds because I'm sure, as many of you saw in the news, when it was time to distribute those monies, they were distributing the monies to organizations like Shake Shack, who listed themselves as a small business and received like $20 million. And it was, so most of us were we absolutely weren't getting anywhere near that money. So the SBA came back a month later and gave me a small amount. I took that money, I was able to put it in the business and actually be able to maintain an assistant that I have who helps us do a lot of project management and back end work. The SBA, I got turned down after the third round. I just assumed I'm not going to even deal in this anymore. It'll be what it'll be. And I actually just received another notice from them saying move forward to the second round, which has never happened. But in the 2 months since this has started, a lot of my friends have taken that loan and then started to read the fine print. Always read the paperwork when you guys are applying for things or you're looking at things, even before you fill it out. Go through and get to that, to the part that, the TLDR. Go through that, because what a lot of people learned at the PPP is they thought, and they were told by the media and by like the sort of sound bites in the news, you'll get this loan, it'll allow you to protect your employees, it can be forgiven come tax time next year. What it didn't explain is that condition for being forgiven has a bunch of criteria you have to meet. You might not meet them. And if you spend that money and the next year you need to pay it back come tax time, that's up to $10,000 or more dollars that you have to come out of pocket and give back. Right. There is also a provision in the PPP package that if you take the money, you have to start repaying it within 6 months, like it's a loan. So for anybody who got the money in March, by August of this year, you have to start making incremental payments to return the money. And that's outside of the forgiveness. So it's one of the most important things I've learned about business is I used to hate the fine print. I love the fine print now, because that's where those secrets are. And I'm like you, Barry. I like to know the tea. So I'm just gonna read it. I'll go through and read all of it, because that's how they get you. They get you in thinking you're so busy, or it's so complex, or it's too much to understand. And then you accidentally sign away your rights, your responsibilities, your protections by giving up things, just by signing your name or checking a box and going, okay, before you look at details. Look at the details. It's so important. I would have happily taken that money without understanding and been like, oh, I got 10,000, I could do some more stuff. And then this time next year, I would have been screwed, because there would have been no way I could have just sort of come up with 10,000 on the fly to pay back a loan that I probably wouldn't have qualified for in full.
Smart. There was something you said during one of your Women in Podcasting. That is tomorrow. You can
Yes, it's
find
tomorrow.
it on her Twitter and things like that. If you want to watch this, she'll be doing it by herself and she'll cover a lot more. But one of the Women in Podcasting things you did, you talked about when you had to deal with a lawyer. I'm not sure if you said lawyer or attorney, because there was a story told or someone said something on a podcast, and then someone else reached out saying, like, that's not how I feel about it, or things like that. And then you have to correct that or go deeper into that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. So a lot of the shows we do are first person accounts. We do conversation, chatcast based shows, but we also do interview based shows. And one of the shows that we do involves interviews of women in the process of failure and what they go through. So one of the people we interviewed talked about her failure at love. And she told a very specific story about her experience with domestic abuse. Now, before we get into the meat and potatoes of the story, I will always cop to the thing we did wrong. We didn't vet the story hard enough, and we didn't put in enough protections to create anonymity around the story. We thought because there was a record in the police department, because she actually had, proof that on paper that this happened in a certain way, that it was, that she could tell the story if she left names out. We left names out. We changed location, but we didn't obscure it enough. So what wound up happening is she told the story. We released the episode. Within the first 2 weeks, we had, it was one of our newer podcasts, and it got about 1,500 downloads on it. And then we got an email from her ex-husband, who basically, in a very specific only way, in the way that white men with the ability to have power do, threatened us without threatening us directly. He said, I don't think you want to do this. I think you're smarter than this. right? It was that kind of implication. My first response and my first reaction was, well, he can kick rocks because his name ain't on the masthead, mine is. And then my actual business leader, owner of the company instincts kicked in. I needed to know what our rights were. So I got in touch with a lawyer friend. I also got in touch with our company attorney. And here's the thing. And if you're building a podcast, if you're building things like this, and you need to take them seriously from day one, you need to make sure you get protections around yourself as quickly as possible, whether it's a trademark to protect your IP, or an attorney that you can pay to make sure that the structure of your business or the understandings of your business are solid. You need that protection. What I was able to find out from my attorney was this guy, although full of shit and really dislikable, had a right to sue us if he wanted to. And because it's a podcast, it's considered national material. So he could sue me in multiple states, the state where he lived and the state where I live. So we went from this guy's a joke to he could sue myself, our show host, and the company and his ex-wife in 2 different states minimum. And even though most likely a court would throw it out, we would have to lawyer up in 2 states and fight. And like I said, from me as the company owner's perspective, I would have been fighting 3 different lawsuits in 2 different states, because it would have been it would have been lawyers to protect myself as an individual, the brand, and my show host, because there was no way I was going to throw my show host under the bus with this. She worked for us. We all worked in good faith together to make this product. Ultimately, my attorney made 2 recommendations. She said, pull the episode off the air, send him a message back, without any conversation. The message just says who you are, what authority you hold to make decisions, and that you took an action on this date, and that's it. So that's what I did. I sent him an email that said, I'm Twila Dang. I'm the founder and CEO of Matriarch Digital Media. We have removed the content that you discussed as of this date on this time, and it will take this long to basically disappear off of all platforms. And I did no more engagement. He tried, he did the reach back out, like, I'm really glad that you took the time to keep that, sit down. It was, we knew we weren't doing any of that, but it was valuable because it's a thing that we talk about a lot here at the company, which are sometimes your stories are not your own. If you are telling a story and it's just about you and your experience, you've already vetted it. You know how much you're comfortable sharing about yourself. But when other people become involved in your narrative, you have to make decisions about how you're going to tell that narrative. You need to go have discussions with the people in your life that are important. One of the biggest things that we did not realize when she told us the story is that she and her husband have had this contention going on for years post-divorce. And she made it seem like this was way in her rear view, but really they bark at each other all the time. So had we known that, we wouldn't have told her story. We would have found a more appropriate story to tell with someone who is on the actual other side of healing, who would have actually been in a position to do so. But it's a lesson that you learn, especially as a storyteller of any sort. If the story is not just your own, you need to get permission to tell it. If the people in your life don't give you permission to tell it, don't tell it. And ultimately, as the producer, you have to have enough instinct to protect not only the integrity of a story and the integrity of the podcast you're building, but the integrity of the company and the people that you work for, because if you put everybody at risk, it is a real thing. It can go wrong.
That's a good thing. Have you ever experienced anything like that so far, Renay? With your podcast and like having a response or anybody asking anything more or anything?
No, with About Race, we had someone because Renay's a journalist, and so we had a journalist who helped make sure we obscured stories, who just helped us go through. She went through the transcripts and was like, hey, that's a bit, remove that and things like that. So we kind of did that first. And then everything else, apart from me telling my own stories in interviews, no, because Anthems is more, it's kind of, poetry, fiction, things like that. And then the other show we make is just the news. So I haven't done another documentary show yet. Well, we're in the works, but out. No. So I haven't come across that. But it is something to really keep in mind.
Okay.
And I have to say, if I did, because I haven't pointed out and I haven't talked to Renay in a minute, but Anthems is fantastic. And if you're looking for, I'm sure many people on the thread and many of our Black brothers and sisters who are out here and making things right now, who are being constantly asked on a loop right now, what can I do? What can I take in? About Race is a really good thing to take in. I mean, it's deeply thoughtful. It's really smart. It's really well done. Renay made it, so of course I'm going to support it, but I'm not saying it just because I like her. It's actually really, really, really well done. So if you're looking for something to recommend, I don't see as many people recommending enough podcasts to people, because I think audio has a way to touch you and get into your soul in a way that's different than when you're seeing an image or when you're reading a book. But it's a great place to start if you need to make a recommendation or something to just tell your white friends to go do so they can leave you be.
Okay, just like off topic really quick, but how you just said about podcast recommendations, Destin of the Friend Zone did a thing on his Instagram where he talked about 3 different podcasts he thinks people should, watch or things like that. And I was like, oh my God, I make things so complicated because, there was that whole tripod thing they tried years ago, things like that. And I was like, but what if we just did a call to action to say one day or like during the week, 1 week, like, just post a video or, something on your Instagram that just like recommends 2 or 3 podcasts and why you want to recommend those podcasts, or like, something for people to listen to kind of just let's talk about podcasting.
I also think put them so on About Race in particular, I think 2 episodes in, we realized we had an audience and we were like, let's use this platform. So at the end of every show, at the end of the rest of the show, we recommended a podcast.
It's smart. I mean, that. And then, one thing to get back to this. I know you said, like, when this all started to burst, I want to say, what was it, like a week or 2 ago? I can't even think of it.
Yeah, we're now 17, 18 days in. Yeah.
Renay, I remember when, like, you saw About Race with where Renay was at the top of the UK Apple podcast charts. I know it was top 50 in the US. Other places, it was high also. And like in the first day, I think you said it like got 46,000 listens of like people rediscovering it. Is it like in the UK, like how it is in the US, where you could do the DAI, the dynamic ad insertion, where you could have put more ads on it or something like that if you wanted to, or no?
Yeah, we could have monetized it. Me and Renny didn't even discuss it because I was like, do you know what? We made it back then and it's kind of past. We're both doing our other things now. And it's like, I also wanted to be aware because people are building platforms off of Black Lives Matter right now, of performative activism, right? And they're becoming influencers and things like that. And I think it's something I'm glad people can discover it and it's got no ads on it now. And I'm glad we didn't put ads on it because I'm like now. Because it would make it look like we're trying to profit off of this.
Okay.
And because I haven't really shared it either. Like I've like it went to number 1. Like obviously I'm like, oh my God, it's gone to number 1. But I haven't been like, here, listen to it. Do you know what I mean?
Once a day, a couple of times a day, re-pushing it out.
I'm interjecting here because I think that's really wonderful that you do that and that you're thinking that you're making it bigger than, just profitability. But ultimately, people are going to learn and they're showing up in numbers based on IP and intellectual rigor and physical work that you did. You deserve to get more money off of that because it's something that you made as a part of your business. And even if you don't feel comfortable keeping the money that comes off of that and you want to send it somewhere, you are absolutely entitled to bring money in off of that. Every single book we have recommended that, in the last 17 days that somebody bought meant the publisher and the publishing house made some money as people are starting to grow and learn in their privilege. You're entitled to that too. I don't want anybody, I think it's something that Black people do. We think we are so altruistic that we do more for everyone than they absolutely deserve. We have been carrying all this on our back forever. And if that means we're in a flashpoint where people not only want to learn, but pay us while they learn, we should be allowed to get paid. And there will be no judgment because there's too much white guilt going on around for judgment to come into play. That's why everybody's Cash App is popping right now. That's why everybody's coursework is popping right now. That's why everybody's content is popping right now because they know what we've been offering, what we've been putting here all along. Like I said, I love that you're being so willing to say, you know, this is for the greater good, but the greater good is allowed to take care of you and you're entitled to it.
I just think it was because it was so long, not so long ago, it was like 2.5 years ago. It was just more the whole thing like of the last couple of weeks with it's just been weird.
I understand that. It
can be a weird feeling. I mean, even for me, like I would say, you know, I would say I'm probably less than you. I'm in the room. You said you asked for 300,000. I'd probably be in the room asking for 150,000. You know, with Podcast in Color and the money that I've gotten in the last 17, 18 days, I can say like after the first day, like even like half a day when people were sending money in and things like that, I had to literally convince myself not to delete the thread, not to
we just talked about
ask
this.
people not to send any more money or something. Like it wasn't like it was like when I got to like 400, I'm like, you know, I can pay for a year's Squarespace or something like that. You know, I'm fine. And then more was coming in, and I was like, I mean, I guess, you know, I can do more with the website. And then I was like,
but it was just weird because even so, Renay, the author who I worked with on the podcast, she has just broken British history. Her book has been. She's the first Black woman in the history of the bestseller charts in the UK to go to number 1.
Wow.
And it's like, and our show went to number 1 as well. And like, she's broken all kinds of records literally this week with her book. But when we went to number 1, we were like talking about it, and it's like, it's great. We had hoped, you know, when it first came out, and it didn't do badly when it first came out, but it's just so weird that like everything we went through to make it, like, oh, you know, no one wants to listen to it. Oh, you know, raise money on funding and
made it in your living room.
Make it in my house. Yeah, make it in my house. And it's like, we were right the whole time. And it's like, and it was just frustrating. The whole thing has been frustrating, like with journalists putting it, you know, everyone putting it on their lists and like, oh, tweeting it, you should listen to this, blah, blah. And I'm like, came out 2.5 years ago. Like, you should have been listening to it before. You should have known it was important before.
Renay, that's why they need to pay you now.
Yeah, it's just.
I understand that frustration. We have all been having that conversation in our chat groups about, you know, this idea that I'm glad y'all showed up now, but can we have a minute to just be in our feelings about the fact that it took you this long to show up? Because you're not dumb. You understood. You willfully disregarded it. And just because now you want to show up with full energy, I mean, I appreciate you showing up now, but you're going to need to give me 5 minutes because I'm in my feelings about it. And that's hard.
It's so funny. I'm not sure if you guys saw the share the mic now thing hashtag.
I did,
I almost wish, I'm just like, on some level, I'm like, I know people don't really know me, but I'm like, I almost wish Lovey would have reached out so we could have included more podcast women, you know, and maybe did some podcast exchanges, because like, it's so much like that. I'm like, there's so many white women in podcasting that could have shared their Instagram account so that somebody else in podcasting, like maybe you, Renay, or other people, you know, to learn about them in the podcasting industry. I think that would have really been a huge thing. I've watched a few of the lives, but I'm not sure if you all saw the one that Myleik did on Cheryl Strayhead's Instagram live. Yeah. But she did a thing, and then she invited 2 women. She was just like, all right, I'm gonna say okay for, you know, to join a chat. Like, I don't know you, we'll see, you know, what happens. And both people shared stories that were like so similar. And then like one of them said something, and I was like, I don't think I really realized that until now, that was like a microaggression that I've been dealing with in different ways, you know, at work, of like me being in a room and somebody saying something about my hair. I don't respond to stuff like that anymore. But like people would say something or something like that, and it would just make me think right before I got to work, I would almost be stressed, like, I'm about to go in here with this new hairstyle. There's going to be people in here asking me like if it's my hair, or like, what did I do? Or like, you know, these other kind of things. And then like one woman that was like talking about like show up for me. I was like, that's one thing I can say working for Loudspeakers Network, LSN is how I usually do it, is that anytime I've been very frustrated or like talked to Chris Morrow, my boss, about things, or even like in a room with other people, like he co-signs me, and I so appreciate that. Like, or like even somebody else, if Jonathan Mena is there, other people, like somebody, like if I say something, somebody says Barry said that, like, or Barry says this is what we need to be doing, or like it's never a thing where I'm just like on my own. And I was like, wow, it feels so good to work around Black people. It feels so good, like Chris Brown was white, but I'm just like, it feels good to work around a supportive system of people actually seeing you and what you're doing. And if you say something, they're like, word is bond. Did you hear that? Like, y'all heard that though, right? So it's never like me saying something where I would be in spaces before, and then it'd be like a half an hour later, somebody else say something, and I'd be like, it's like I didn't talk. Like it's like I'm a whole invisible person. It's like I'm a whole thing. Yep. And so it was just like,
well, that was me.
So we all be doing this.
That's me in the UK 2 weeks ago, because they've only just started listening this week. Literally this week, and I'm like, I've not said anything new, guys. Said nothing new.
Nope. And that's why we need a minute to be in our feelings, because it's every last one of us has been saying this.
Every Black person had to have at least one day where they were in their feelings about it, because I know I had a whole thing like, oh, for real? I mean, I'm glad for the people that have seen me, but I'm glad on a bigger level, y'all are acting like, the things I do actually matters, because I think that, but sometimes y'all do things and I'm like, well, maybe it doesn't, and maybe it doesn't care. Maybe, I could just disappear and it would be okay.
But you're even going, I had a meeting this week. So I had meetings with lots of white people this week, because, they're confessing. But I had a meeting about like a production company and their lack of diversity and whatnot. And the guy, and it only clicked like the next day in the morning when I was getting dressed. And I was like, he just did that. And he basically was like, oh, blah, blah. He named 3 people, 3 of Black staff. And he's like, oh, you know them. And I was like, well, I don't. But then I was like, the next one, I was like, wait, he just named 3 random Black people that work for his company and assumed I know them. And it's just the casualness of it. It's like,
you know what we're talking about. Like,
yeah, and I was like, I don't know them. I don't know every Black person. And actually, I know a white person who works at your company, FYI.
Like, I don't know when's the next time I will hug anybody, but I really wish I could hug that woman from the Bon Appetit. Is that how, like, the website?
Oh, yes, Sola. Mm-hmm.
I was like, I understand you, Sola. Like, there are so many of us, Sola. There are so many of us that they come to us. Like, when I was watching the video, and it was making me emotional, is that somebody can have the job you want and come ask you for the answers that you are not getting paid for. And like, that is just a regular way. And I was like, oh my God.
Barry, Barry, that's what all of us have been doing on social media for at least the last 2 to 3 years, right? Where you start a thread and people be in your mentions, like asking you stuff about that. I'll do a Women in Podcasting and people ask me, I get calls all the time that like, hey, can you, I'd love to have coffee. I'd love to grab coffee with you sometime. And they want to pick my brain about how I run this business and how I do what I do. And it has zero to do with wanting to do collaborative work with me or to put me in a position to do other work. It's to take the thing that I've built and figure out how to replicate it without anybody that looks like me involved in it. And that's so common that I had to, and here's the thing, because we are always trying to provide worth and provide value and show our worth, we overgive and overshare. And it took me forever to charge consultant money. It took me a very long time to say, my time is of value. And if you want it, it costs this much. And then even when I started charging consulting, I had to put a timer on and put the phone on the table so I could see the hour is up. Don't give them no more for free. Because I'll just keep talking, trying to prove like, I do know this, I know this. I have to prove to you that I know anything. I hold space because I'm here and I'm a human being and I've accomplished everything I've accomplished. You're lucky to have space with me. Now cut my check.
And that's what I've had to come around to. I would say I'm like 70% there.
We're working on it. We're working on it. But like, it is a huge thing. Like, I have to know that I should be getting paid for the things that I do. I've always just thought, if I have it, I just want to give it. And now I'm like, like, it's people that do less than me making way more than me. So I cannot do this for free no more. So listen, Barry, I have a running tab of the money I owe you for every time you just sneak a note, you slide into my DMs on Twitter, like, okay, go do this next. Okay, go fix this now. And I'm like, I'm like, okay.
The other day, I was like, I wonder if she's gonna be irritated because I'm about to do this thing that I do to people.
Nope.
You can see, I was like, there's so many people I've done that to. I screenshot whatever, like their Instagram story or tweet or something. I get to circling, like, I'm gonna need this here. I'm gonna need this here.
She's I'm gonna
need a link.
This.
I'm gonna need this.
Fix this. Yes. And she was like, I don't want to offend you. I was like, girl, I have children.
No,
Nothing
I'm gonna
offends
need
me.
this to be
Tell me
how-
what to do to make it better. There's stuff that I don't even think about. Like she helped me fix, she gave me some stuff to fix on my Twitter a couple of days ago. And mind you, I set those Twitters up, and my original Twitter I set up in like 2011. So I've barely touched it except to add like title and take off title, And so it was like, oh, that's common sense. I never did that. I didn't think to do that. And then I went and just added the stuff she told me to add. But it's things like this. Here's the thing. It's not in your head. You're thinking it's simple because you just know it and you understand it. But that's actually knowledge and a skill set you've developed. If other people want access to that, they're allowed to pay you, and they should be expected to pay you, and they should expect to pay. They should not expect to be getting this stuff as a favor, as oh, we're all in this together. Nah, friend, you got money.
And then I might have to, I don't know if Renay does it. I'm gonna let you know, this is one of the things I had sent her by DM on Twitter, your bio, if your company, I'm not sure if you've added broccoli or if you just have broccoli content written in the bio. But yeah, like some people don't have the @ and I'm like, if you don't have the @
she's saying some people like it wasn't me.
it makes you think that company isn't on Twitter. And I'm like, but if that @ is there, you go to that person's timeline, and you're like, oh, that's the company. I can just go click on that and find probably what I need. But if it's just written there, to me, my mind automatically goes like, oh, the company must not have a Twitter. But if I know it does, I'm like, you don't understand. You're not leading people to the other thing easily. Like, if you make them search, I'm like, there's so many shiny objects. I mean, I'm not saying I smoke weed because, I'm trying to get a job. But like, if I did, you'd be dealing with weed smokers that like shiny objects. I was doing this. Who knows what I started doing like 10 seconds. And then it's like a couple of hours later, I'm like, I was trying to get to that business account on Twitter and I never did that thing. So like, you just have to kind of think. I'm always telling people like, I deal with me and my cousins and stuff, and they're always doing stuff. And I'm like, I deal with things like I'm dealing with my cousin that has an attention span of like 5 minutes. And anything past that, if it took too long or anything else, it's done. And I have to go back and remind her what we were doing to get to where we're going. I'm like, I think of people like that. That's why I don't like to do a tweet. I don't like to retweet tweets without a link because I'm like, you're counting on somebody to go to a podcast app, remember what your name is and actually spell it right, and then remember what the logo looks like. And I'm like, at least if you have a link, no matter what link it is, someone can click that link and say, I know what the logo looks like, I know what the name looks like, and I can go to another podcast app and find that if that's where I'm comfortable. But at least I know that much, or like the episodes I'm looking for, if they're, because a lot of people have one logo here and another logo here and another logo here. And I'm like, but if you have the episode name, somebody can kind of figure out what you have going on. And
Mary, so I feel attacked. I told you, I got stuff to do.
Simple. It needs to be simple.
I'm trying. I got stuff to do.
Okay. Well, okay. So we'll go through some of these Q&A questions. Oh, and Cindy. I mean, look, Cindy. And I feel like you know more than me. Cindy saying she stopped doing free consult earlier this year. I want to know, like, when I met her at Work It, I was like, oh, Cindy doing it all. Cindy got all these jobs. Like, what should I be doing? I should be able to list the things that I do because I don't. And I was like, okay. She was like, oh no, I do this, I do that, I do this, and I be ready. And I was like, I should be ready too. You're right. I should be ready.
Listen, that's our new 2020. That's the rest of our 2020 mantra. Besides, let this year be over, is going to be get paid for all your work. All of it.
I think it's get paid for all my work. And one of the things my cousin, we were in a car this morning. We go to the store on Saturday mornings. She said, I was trying to talk to somebody what you were doing, and I didn't have an accurate description. And I was like, that just tells me I need to work on it better because I do so many things. I don't necessarily ever give anybody a short, succinct, like, this is all I do. I usually just mention one of the things I do and like, go ahead with that. So I was like, I need to try to condense or like say the things, but I like to discount myself just because of the things I do, like, and act like I don't do other things sometimes. But I would have to accept the things that I do and say, I do this, this, and this. And that's just a whole nother hill.
Barry, I'll tell you something. Someone taught this to me, and it was really important because the first years we did the business, I would just say, when people ask what I do, I would go, I do a thing, I make stuff. I didn't have a title and I didn't talk about the work properly. And someone pulled me aside and said, listen, you're trying to get into these rooms and compete with white people doing what you're doing at a higher level that you're doing it in. You need to have at least the base language that people understand so that they will take you seriously and allow you to elevate yourself into these rooms the way you need to be. You need to pick a proper title. You need to make sure you're able to explain what you do or what category you work in. And that language is important because when you get in the rooms of people that might not understand the creative part of your work, they will understand founder, they will understand CEO, they will understand podcast producer, right? They will understand creative, under this umbrella. But when I was just like, I just make stuff, they didn't take it seriously. And ultimately I wasn't taking myself seriously. And we're actually really entitled to that. It's one of the most important pieces of this. If you're doing this kind of work, is investing in it enough and investing in yourself enough. And I'm not talking investment of money, invest the mental energy into yourself to be able to be able to get to the level you're trying to get to.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay. So to start to answer some of these questions, and I'm going to do between the splash set and the Q&A, and then I'll depend on your daughter assistant.
I'm not seeing anything on Facebook so far, so
okay.
We're good.
If there's anybody on Facebook. So one of the ones I want to start with is, how do you determine the right podcast to possibly guest on and have them guest to help boost your audience reach? And we can all kind of comment on this. I'll go first, just like maybe a little 1-minute comment. For me, when you say that, I think guest on every podcast that you can guest on. Like, if it applies to you or they want to have you on a half an hour or an hour, like, usually I set the time. I've had to learn that, of your time, boosting your thing. And one thing I learned from guesting on different podcasts is why I say guest on a podcast that accepts you, and talks to someone, is you learn their different processes. Like from Renay of Dreams and Drive, I want to say that might've been the first podcast I was on or close to it. She reached out to me 3 times to be on her podcast. And that was because I wasn't necessarily comfortable with it. I'm very bad. I wouldn't say bad at email, but I don't care about email in a way. Like, you would send me an email, I'll read the email and just keep going. I'm like, I won't reply. Like, it's nothing against it. I just think like, it's probably going to be a lot to reply to that. And she has followed up 3 times. And on the 3rd time, I said, you know what, Renay? Just send me a calendar link. I will be on your podcast. Let's do it. She was like, thank you, finally. But to me, determination and learning how to do that in a not annoying way is like a whole nother thing. It was never annoying. It was never like, oh, following up with you again. It was more like, hey, I just wanted to reach out. It's been a little while and talk to, I do want you to be on my podcast. You put a little paragraph of what we might be able to talk about. And then after I was on her podcast, Renay is really good about sending, when an episode is going to be released, she sends you the episode. She sends you different links to the episode. She's going to send you a couple of audiograms, maybe like a graphic to put on your Instagram if you just want to do a picture, but it's going to be like a complete package. And I'm like, without her doing that, I probably wouldn't have known, that people are just going to be like, hey, can you be on my podcast and record? Everybody has a different thing, but you get to somebody that has a good process. And it kind of teaches you more about how you can deal with the process and dealing with other people is how I feel. But okay, so I'll let Renay maybe go next if you have something.
I don't go on many podcasts.
And I feel you should, but okay.
Because I go on some. So I'm on one next week, actually, I think. Next week I'm on a podcast called Control Delete. So I do podcasts, but obviously, so I'm in the UK. So some podcasts are related to radio and it's related to the BBC. Now, I'm suspicious of them. And they like to turn things into debates. And I'm just like, do you know what? And like, I'm not a very wordy person. I'm very like just straight, like, straight. I'm not a wordy person. See, I couldn't find the words. And I sometimes think that they're like, oh yeah, it's about X, Y, and Z, but they always will want to bring up diversity. And I don't do diversity talks. And I would never go, definitely not on the BBC, any station, to talk about diversity, because then you have to prove why it's good. And I'm like, that's not what I'm about. So I don't really, I'm more suspicious of those kind of ones, but straight podcasts, like I pretty much would go on as long as I like the people, or as long as I don't like, as long as I don't have an issue with the person, like I'd go on a podcast. But yeah, so when it's related to a wider thing, I'm kind of like not into it.
But do you think other people should, or like, would you encourage the hosts of your podcast to go on other podcasts and things like that?
It's still definitely podcasts. I think podcasts are a great way to, so we've got a show coming up about, it's not a parenting podcast, but it's about kind of birth and stuff. It's not about birth, but mental health around birth. And it's good for the host to go on other parenting podcasts. Because it's a way to tap into an audience, and we're like kind of developing a book podcast as well. And again, we want to tap into, you know, people with book clubs and book like type podcasts. So you would guest on those, but sometimes when it's unrelated, so like there's general, you know, media type shows or general shows, you have to see what the content is, because sometimes it's actually no use for you, if that makes sense. Yeah,
it does make sense. So it's more, you're like, just to attach that, it's more the niche podcast, and you're like, I would rather like go into that. If I'm doing a podcast about this one thing, it's easier for it to go about that. But if it was a podcast necessarily about that Renay did, like about race, the general or other things, she would
be baited. I think if you were doing a show, literally the show about race, that particular show. Well, Renay does interviews anyway, because she's an author. But like that particular show, you're more likely to be baited into a debate. So you have to be very careful where you're going. If you're doing a general, like Anthem's Pride, for example, you know that you can go on shows that have an LGBTQ audience. But you wouldn't necessarily go on a show where they're like, let's debate trans issues.
Exactly. Okay, understood.
Yeah. So you just make sure you find out like what it's about, and like who the other guests, if it's like a panel type show, or if it's like a round table thing, what is their track record basically. So it's with some shows it's easier, like the parenting one, how wrong can you go, and like with a book one, can't really get that controversial. But with like Anthem's Pride and race, you will get asked to go on shows, but they wouldn't necessarily be a good experience for the host, and they are there to kind of sometimes set you up. So it's different shows, different rules.
Okay.
I only have one thing to say. Well, no, two. One, as an indie, because we're way down sort of in the trenches with the indie podcasters. Discoverability is the number one tool for podcasts to be found. The easiest form of discoverability and the most successful across indies and large scale corporations in the United States is appearing on other podcasts. So it's important for your host, if possible, to get themselves in front of other audiences. It's really good for audience trade, audience share. We talk a lot about that with small podcasters, and like you can help expose your audience to someone, and then they can expose their audience to you, and then you can kind of help do a growth vehicle that way. Right now I'm in the middle of a project for American Public Media. I'm making a financial literacy podcast with them, and a part of our marketing strategy as we get closer to the release date is going to be getting our host out on other programs, and possibly getting me as a part of the project out on other programs, talking about the show, exposing, talking about the issues around the show. I agree with Renay 100%. There's a difference between doing something that's in a particular category or a niche, and then or trying to build audience around you as a personality. If you're trying to build around a personality, you can go on a more wider variety of shows and sort of be dazzling and sparkling in places. But when you talk about a particular issue, you have to make sure that you are basically putting yourself in safe situations. And that's important. But at the end of the day, I mean, podcasting is still a medium that doesn't have good searchability and discoverability tools. Our actual infrastructure for this industry is kind of garbage. And so the best way to discover it is to get on other people, get your product in front of other people's eyes. And the best way to do that is to appear on other people's podcasts, at least in the United States. It might not hold all the way around the world, but for sure in the United States, it is still the number one tool.
And on the follow-up thing, I'll send a Work It podcast. I think it was somebody from NPR said the same thing, but kind of just went over engagement things and ways to increase your downloads. And that's how I've always said, like, guesting on other podcasts, you don't know who's listening, or like when I listen to stuff, I'm always listening for other people too. So I'm always like, oh, okay, that person doesn't apply to me, but my cousin likes knitting stuff. So let me tell my cousin about this knitting thing that I just heard about this lady doing. Like it's not going to always apply to everybody, but if you explain it in a good enough way, they can explain to somebody else that you exist, if they know you like it, is how I went about it. Okay, I'm gonna do another one from this sheet. It was someone that asked, how do you find new subjects for your podcast? Oh, how do you keep your podcast new and fresh with topics?
We follow the muse a lot of the time. I mean, it's what's going on, what's current and what's relevant in our lives. We kind of keep a running list of conversations that we have. I always say there's always stories to tell. We don't chase after what's popular right now. We make evergreen content. So because we focus mostly on women, what we're trying to do is redefine the way that women have media made for them. It's no secret that I beat the drum that women's media as it exists is a scam. And I don't want it to exist anymore this way. So we are always trying to change the way that women look at themselves, think of themselves, talk about other women. And there is infinite pools of information we can get into around that. So we tend to have shows that are set on archetypes and themes. And then every time we go to make a new season, we go back and revisit those themes and say, what's relevant right now, what's coming up for us in our lives, what's coming up that we're seeing in the culture, and let's figure out how to talk about it.
Yeah, and the only show that kind of we've got that's ongoing, that's not news related is, I keep bringing up anthems, but it's basically we just have one brief, and the brief, sorry, Renay, and the way to keep it fresh is the people. So the brief is we go out to we had a women's one for Women's Month. In March, and then the Pride series is out now for the month of June, and in between that we've had Anthems Home, where we opened up submissions to anyone who was at home, because we all are. And basically the brief is you can write a short story, a manifesto, poem, poem or personal essay, and that it's all from your experience. So when you get it in, every single person is different. And we deliberately, we try and do different ages, different backgrounds, different Anthems Home in particular, we had people from around the world as well, because everyone quarantined differently. But the brief, it wasn't that it's about quarantine, it's you're in quarantine, but the brief is the same throughout. So the brief for Anthems Women is the same brief for Anthems Pride, same brief for Anthems Home. You might just happen to be a woman. You might just happen to be queer. You might just happen to be in quarantine. It's not about that. So you constantly get fresh material. So that's how we kind of make it fresh. It's just the people that we choose and the kind of, diverse cast of people that we work with. Oh, you're mute.
She forgot she was muted.
Sorry. That's what Twila said, is that if you kind of have a conversation, like whether you're hosting by yourself or you're talking to other people, like, hey, I just kind of want to workshop some things I might talk about on my podcast. Can you have a conversation with me and kind of either record it or write down like the things that pop up when you're talking to somebody else? Like if I was doing necessarily a pop culture podcast or something now, I might talk to a couple of my cousins about maybe what they're doing and things like that, and kind of write things down of like, oh, okay, I didn't even think about that. Like, they're on the other side of things. They use Facebook more than like how I use Twitter. So like their kind of things usually are a different way of thinking. They also have children and I don't. So they would see different things, or like, like their kids are doing TikTok or they're doing this other thing, and, stuff like that of like how they're gathering and that sort of thing, where I'd be like, oh, maybe I'll talk about that, or bring somebody on to talk about that. So it's kind of doing that and making sure you're writing down different ideas. And it's just like the whole networking thing. It might not be something you use this season, but it might come back around where you're like, oh, you know what? Now it's the time to talk about that. Just like I'm sure there's like how the About Race with Renay, it was a few years ago, but like when all this happened, it was the right time of like, oh, it's sparked, it's already created. Nobody have to go into a room and say, remember that podcast I told you 3 years ago would have been good? Now we can start recording it, and hopefully people pay attention to it in 4 or 5 months, talking about something they would have really liked when all that popped off, back then. So to me, you can always do that. It's something to research the dynamic ad insertion and making sure your podcast hosting would do that. So, if you did want to add ads to something later on, because it was getting a lot of play that it didn't get the first time around, it is something you can go back and do. So that is about making money off of old content. And then that goes into the next question I'm going to ask. I'm not sure if you've all, because we're all kind of new, is there different ways that you might repackage, if somebody with 3 years of content, and they just said, what kind of different ways might I repackage my archive or like things to do with it?
I can speak to that because I don't let us make anything that we can't repurpose. So anything, any audio we make, we have a mandate. I have an internal mandate that we have to find at least 7 different ways to use it. So that is the original audio itself on the podcast. That is repackaging it for other venues outside of podcasting platforms, whether that's showing up on YouTube or having it be ready to go when one of these new mechanisms come up, like how you can pin audio and things to Pinterest now, which you couldn't do 3 years ago. We take the content that you're creating itself is, once you have that transcript made, you're able to take that and turn it into blog posts. You're able to take that and turn it into social media that you can use as a vehicle for the business later on. The content that you're making and the voice that your host is starting to create can actually be transferred into live event structure or coursework, or webinars or workshops, into the future that can be made into revenue. Ultimately, we have some people that are making things that are really essay based because they're telling deeply personal stories. And after they've done 40 episodes of this, that's 40 episodes. When you take those transcripts and put them together, that's at least half of a book. Right. So, but the thing is, when you make something from the very first time you make it, you have to think that it could have this much wider, bigger shelf life than you ever anticipated. And if you're aware of that going in and you make it and you just be, just kind of give yourself the chance to be wildly imaginative with it, you can really use it. Our first shows had 40 episodes we made as a complete season before we released, because back then you had to churn stuff out week to week. It wasn't this season model that we're in now. If you go back and look at those original episodes, we have certain episodes that all fit under like one theme. Like we do a health and wellness show. So we did a whole series. We did 4 or 5 episodes on menopause and perimenopause. So guess what? Now we've got a whole mini series on menopause that we can just repackage, put in some new headers and footer clips or clip things out, put it together. And now we've got a whole new thing we can run on a different time at a different place, right? That original content actually from that podcast actually led to a spinoff podcast that we now run about endometriosis because we talked about it so much in this original podcast. So the ability to take content you've made and reuse it and repurpose it, it's a lot easier than people think. I think a lot of times you just get blocked into thinking you made this one thing and that's all that it is. It's actually so much more than that if you allow yourself to think bigger.
And just to bring up a thing, I had talked to Joy about this. Well, sorry, Dr. Joy of Therapy for Black Girls. If you notice on her Twitter, not her Twitter timeline, on her Instagram, I had just mentioned one day, like, why don't you post different episodes that like connect together and that kind of thing. And so she started doing that, or having her social media manager do that. And like, I can see that people gather around that. And then sometimes they'll ask questions because they know she'll do that and maybe create a list about that. Like, oh, I'm looking for, podcasts on friendships you've done. Here's the 4 sessions on that, or things like that. And so I think like when you do that, it's Instagram content, like how you said, like, you can use it for a few different things. So it's Instagram content, it's easily shareable, and it is something that listeners have that they can say, oh, this is probably what my friend might like. And I can just send her a link to that instead of me just trying to go through the whole archive. Like, I think 51, I think, let me read the episode description on,
Absolutely,
so like
absolutely.
just giving more things to the listeners to say, you can share this with your friends. This makes it easier for them to come in, 100 shows in and like find things that they would like that I've already done and like be able to go through that.
As a quick sidebar on that, we talked a little bit earlier about that idea of having a share day or take a listen to this podcast. We do that with our handle, and what we do when we're going to share episodes, and I'll be honest, we almost only share episodes by other women podcasters. What I do is go into the feed that I'm listening to, and I take the screenshot of the episode as it's playing with the title on it. So that when I'm recommending a podcast to you, I'm not just recommending a podcast, I'm recommending a particular episode to start with. And then we usually run it in Insta stories because it's faster and it allows us to sort of turn it over quicker. But it's an easy way for people to be able to go through a backlog. If you don't know where to start and you consider me a trusted source, then I can say, listen to this particular episode, of Therapy for Black Girls. And then it starts there, and then you get a chance after you've listened to that, then you kind of got a little bit more bandwidth and you'll take more time to go search later. You won't get frustrated and be like, I'm searching, I don't even know where to start. I've given you a place to start. Now you can go explore.
Every good podcast has at least one episode listeners are used to sharing or one episode listeners can recommend. In my opinion, like that's just what it is. Like the read took off. I had a little cousin that was in high school at the time, which is like, yeah, I was saying you should listen to this podcast. It curses all the time. But she literally would recommend it to her friends, and she had the time code in her notes of the Say No to Fuckboys episode of like when the read started. Like literally, she still has it in her phone, but it's the time code of when the read starts. And she sends her friends to the link, and then she goes, go to this time code and then start listening. And after they listen basically to Crystal read people down, it's like, that's why you like the podcast. Go listen to the podcast. You know, like this is what you're looking for on a thing. Renay, did you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, with our shows, we're still in the first cycle, but we would be like because we do anthems by theme, theme. You would be able to, so next year, International Women's Month, the series that came out this year would still be relevant next Women's Month, if that makes sense. So you can do, collections. But my thing is, I want to, in the future, because we're still in our first year of this new broccoli, books, I think, and anthologies.
I was going to say, I can't wait to read the Anthems book, because there's no way you don't make a book out of that. The content is so beautifully led to being a book.
Because I think podcast the books is,
I'm going to do some of the Zoom questions. There was one to, I guess, me and you, Twila, that said, do you offer consulting for pods that are not on your networks, that are fiction, scripted genre? I've done consulting on a lot of different podcasts, like types of podcasts. I don't think any of them have necessarily been the same type in thinking about it. I don't believe so. Everybody has their own thing. Like I think as far as me consulting, I had to figure out what I wanted to consult about, because people like, I would be kind of in this space, like let's talk about further things. And people would want to come to me and like, okay, describe to me podcast 101. And I'd be like, oh, okay, I didn't know this is what we're to do. And so it's like, I'm bringing them in like, okay, so this is what we're talking about with an RSS feed, with sort of things in that. So I think for me, you can't even see my consultant page unless I send you a link. But it's a thing for me where I'm like, I almost want to have a conversation, or I try to ask people, what are they looking to consult about? Because now that I know more people and know people that consult, it's like, if you ask me about a certain thing, like, what are you looking for? I can tell you, oh, you want to talk to Renay, or like, oh, no, you want to talk to Twila, or, this is the person you probably want to talk to about this thing. So I do consults. If you ask me on Twitter, like we can like talk a little bit more about it, and I can say maybe it'll end up me, or maybe I'll send you to someone else. I would say there are people doing that for free right now. If you if you look at that, I mean, it just is. You don't even have to pay for it. But I do notice, nobody saw that Pineapple did do a thing where they're like, you could send an email, say what you want to talk about. If you want to talk about pitching, if you want to talk about going to the next level, like, different things that you want to talk about. And you'd be talking to somebody that worked in the industry. The reason I'm saying this is because you'd be talking to someone that worked in the industry. They work at Pineapple Street Media, that is a successful production company. And you could be getting yourself into networking, or like learning somebody more in the industry that can connect you other places. I think of a lot of things like the Minesweeper game. Like, it's a lot of pressing buttons and like seeing if something opens up, or if only the one little box opens up, and hoping like, it doesn't expire, but you don't die in life, hopefully. But like, it's just choosing that. So that's why I'm always like, I don't mind talking to a new person. If somebody's giving me the option to talk to them for free, I usually take that. And I don't mind like reaching out and saying, you know what, it'd be probably easier for me to do this because I'm meeting somebody new. And then they can probably tell me about X, and O of things that they've done, or what they would say about it. Because Pineapple knows how to pitch. Out of all the things, I'm like, there are so many things I can be shady about. But I'm like, the Richard Simmons podcast, no shade, Jenna, if anybody tells me that. But like, you know how to do it though. Like, you know how to make it happen. You know how to put it together. And like, people might all have something to say about it, but you know what? You making your money, and you did what needed to be done to make more podcasts. And so like, a lot of people, you have to learn, what does that mean? There was someone in here, there was a question in here, and I just wanted to say this while it was on my mind, where somebody talked about getting on a podcast network, or what do you need to, or a podcast, and what do we need to do to get on a network, or what would you want to do to get on a network? And I do want to say, to start with that, always look at the network, see what podcasts they've canceled, and see if they're even looking for you. Most networks, you can ask maybe somebody who works there or maybe even a newer podcast to the network. They don't necessarily pick up podcasts because of the podcast IP, and that's why you need to pay attention to call her daddy. I feel like if you kind of look into that, you learn a lot more about that. But they usually want to start the podcast on their network, so all the podcast IP is under the network, and they're not like fighting with anyone about that. With LSN, I would say kind of things. It's really who you know and how somebody wants to work with you. I hope Chris doesn't get mad at me for saying this. I do know that like at other times, if you had certain numbers, even if you weren't on LSN, you could talk to Chris or like other people and they would add you to like their bank to get ads on your podcast. So it's not necessarily that you're on the network, but I can help you get ads on the network on your podcast. And then, like take my little percentage off. And that's like, you're not on my network, but I kind of put you within my network of podcasts to get ads. But it's a matter of networking in and asking questions about that. And to me, mostly it's about getting on a network is a lot about podcast IP and what that network is going to do with it or how that network deals with things like that. And that's what you need to know to me to be able to join a network or what they want to do with it. But okay, what do you all think? Nothing.
Okay. Two things. For consultants, you should, if there is someone that you know has a significant place in the industry and they're offering free advice, take that free advice. I don't have hardly any status in this industry, but once a month I do a free 2-hour session where we try to answer questions and teach about the industry. And that's an opportunity for you to ask and maybe get connected to other people with more information. I'm happy to do that. I feel like it's a responsibility that I have because I'm trying to show up in this industry in a way that to be the thing that I couldn't find. But if you are asking someone in real life, in real time, for their expertise and their talent to help advance your product, please be willing to pay for that. Please don't try to make somebody feel bad or give them a hard time or doubt them or give them some nonsense about what they say their fee is. If you can't afford it, you can't afford it. If you can, you can. But people need to be paid for their work. It's important that people are paid for their work is valued. And the way we show value with work in the United States and abroad is by paying for it. So you should do that. In terms of getting on a network, I think that IP question is a really big deal. A lot of networks won't want to take you on if they can't own your IP or at least a significant part of it. And you need to be careful of that. Don't just take a network. Don't just go solicit a network just because you think it'll be better for you to be like among a bunch of people. You might be able to make it on your own. You might be able to make it with a collective of people that you work with. But when you get into the business of podcasting, your IP is the most important thing you have. And anything that asks you to give that up is significant, and you have to be really careful because sometimes you make these deals and you can never go back. Like I said, I will second what Barry said. Go do your research about Call Her Daddy and see exactly what happened to those girls. Even while they're sitting and rolling in money, they don't own the most important piece of that puzzle, their IP. And because they don't own it, they got no power.
And it matters. Like I do remember Renay telling me a long time ago, she was like, okay, so like telling me about contracts. Renay, I don't know if you remember this, but you were just like, a lot of people were doing things and signing away the audio part of their contracts, and they didn't know like the things they were signing away. And then it came down to podcasting, and as it grew and stuff, and it was like, oh, you don't have those rights to the audio of like any of this if we do something.
But that's happening now with books. That's been happening. When you do a book deal, Audible get the audio rights. Like you will sell them the audio rights, but it's not broken out into. I think people are getting smarter. Like literally this year, maybe last year, but like Audible would just take the audio rights of your own book.
Okay, so answering that, there's one question here that I do want to answer where she said, getting paid for your work, should we provide a rate for being guests on podcasts? And I say, no, I don't believe you should be like podcasts should be paying people to be like, this is my opinion. I don't believe podcasts should be paying people to be on it. It is a promotion tool of different ways. I don't think there was this guy and I hated that he was at podcast movement. It like grated my nerves. And he was like, I like make people pay to be on my podcast and da-da-da-da-da. And it was like his total listens or whatever were only like 400,000. It was like total. That wasn't what he was getting an episode. Like, it's not like you were going on the read where you were going to get a bump. His total listens, and he had been going for like a couple of years. And I'm like, most people don't even understand that on a bigger level of like the things you get from a podcast, you know, being on it, or like the advantages you might get versus you paying for a podcast, and how that probably has a lower thing of, because how are they getting money, or like their listens and stuff like that. To me, it's just a very murky space, and none of the podcasts like NPR, things like that, I don't believe do anything like that. I've never heard anything like that. So well, that's just my opinion. So
maybe some radio shows have a guest fee, but you have to look at it like a guest, like in America you have the late night talk shows. The guests are not paying to be on there. You know, it's like, it's a promo tool. We have to look at it like every other medium. It's, yes, the network is getting like the entertainment and their ad revenue and everything like that, but the people who go on there want to go on there because they're getting something in return.
Yeah, and the thing is, I always say the dirty secret that most people don't know is to appear on most American late night television shows. This SAG, AFTRA, the Actors Union actually has a fee negotiated. They get like a weird like $300 or $400 fee to appear on these shows. So minimal, in fact, that they almost that some decline it, or some just have it diverted to like some, they just go make a donation or something, but it was worked out as a part of the union. By and large, because podcasting is an industry that doesn't have the same infrastructure that other industries have. And because by and large, in order to get your product in front of people, you have to be able to be on platforms. I would say most aren't paying for guests. You shouldn't expect to be paid as a guest. If someone is asking you to pay to be a guest, tell them to kick rocks and go somewhere else, because it's not necessary. And most of your NPRs, American Public Medias, and those and the like are, because they are also news-based organizations, there's a different standard for journalism in terms of, you know, talking to sources and talking to people in terms of being guests in news format and news podcasts. I would say by and large, this is the only part of the industry where I'm pretty clear on, I don't ask, we don't pay for guests, and we don't ask our people that are associated with our brand to be paid for guests, because that is it's a marketing tool. It's meant to expand your, you know, you don't ask to be paid when an article is written about you. You don't ask to be paid when the newspaper writes about you. You don't ask to be paid if the local television network comes and does a feature or a story about your brand. You don't ask to be paid when somebody forwards or shares your content on social media to help boost the signal. It's all a part of the marketing arm, and that's part of the game that you play.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, and I did want to mention, thank you, Joy. I'll call you Joy. Is that I always bring this up as far as like people having a view of people not on a network, is that, I mean, as far as I know, or at least think, is that Joy Therapy for Black Girls isn't on a podcast network. If it is, I don't believe so. But I know at least her first year and that sort of thing, she wasn't. This is her out of Atlanta. Her husband was producing the podcast. And to me, and this is why I did a Spotify playlist of all the guesting that Joy has done on podcasts, because I'm like, if you see how many times she has been a guest on other podcasts, you shouldn't guess how like she's found her audience and that people know who she is and that she's like a voice everywhere, because it feels like people were reaching out to her and she was like, let's do it. And like, you know, it kept doing it. So like I would always see her name popping up on other podcasts, you know, popping up on my feed in other ways. And to me, that helped. And she did 1 million in under a year. And I always love that, because I'm like, before she had did that, I didn't have anybody to say like, as far as middle America, or wasn't in New York, or like wasn't on a huge pod network and didn't have like this huge burst and, you know, like all this money behind them of like getting them somewhere, but somebody that was like, I am going to grind to make what I want. So, okay. So next thing, I'll just pick a random one. Do you have one thing that you've employed for promoting your show that has helped grow your audience? We are 4 weeks into ours and are consistently growing, but currently looking for creating marketing plan in hopes of reaching more ears. Thoughts?
Renay gets to answer this because she does a better job of it than I do.
Well, so I have a marketing budget.
That's Sony money. Go brag on that Sony money.
Okay. Snaps for that.
But before I had a marketing budget, and I'll use About Race as, because that was like my like independent, not on a network. We just made it. We relied on it was heavy word of mouth, but we got Apple featured us on the homepage. They actually made when it originally came out, they actually made a banner that just said about race. So it was so minimal that if you're racist, you'd click on it. If you weren't racist, you'd click on it. And it just, drove people. Like literally the day it went on Apple, it got 10,000 listens that day. And I remember I was like, oh my God. And then it was, we had audiograms of the key little snippet interviews that we would release. We had I think 3 for each episode that we released throughout the week. And it was, reaching out to other people to share it, basically. So cross promo with other podcasts, which is why at the end of our podcast, we would recommend other podcasts. So it's like cross promotion. And that's what we did to grow. It was only a 9-part series, so you had 9 weeks to play with. But it actually kept obviously living once the series was over, more people, because I think people find podcasts 6 weeks in, really. And then if it's a weekly episode, 6 weeks, people are like, oh yeah, this is good. And then they start sharing it and, doing the reviews and things like that. So it was more, you've got to let it have time. So About Race it did its first, 9 weeks when it was out, but it actually was still living afterwards. And then obviously now it's massive now.
Oh, you actually want me to answer that? Listen, our big thing is, because we're really small, and we're here in the Midwest, and we're in a pocket in an area where, people don't always take what we do seriously, and we're working on changing perception around that. One of the biggest things we have to lean on is our own personal network. We literally have all of our hosts sort of beat the drum within their communities of people and their pockets of influence, and try to drive, initial traffic to just go check it out, and, go support it. It's important. I'm trying to do this thing. I'm trying to get here. Go support the thing. And, and it's kind of the first wave. We use social media because it's a free tool, and I believe in free tools. I have only recently learned the value of allowing ourselves to be put in front. I loathe to be in the front. I like to be, I'm the Wizard of Oz. I like to be behind the curtain. But it did a lot for our business when I allowed myself to be interviewed by, our local paper, who actually distributes to 30 papers around the United States. It made a big difference. It actually is, I just did an interview for ABC News that ran in the last 2 weeks. And we actually saw a bump in accessing our shows based on an interview that had nothing to do with the work that I do as a podcaster. You have to put yourself out there. You have to put yourself out there. You have to know what your elevator pitch is. You have to know what your story is. What's the narrative around your show? What's the narrative around the brand that you're building? And you need to get that out there in as many creative ways as you can. I will make a recommendation. If you're a new podcast and you're in a specific city, even with COVID and the way that the quarantining has impacted our ability to do this, the next real wave and how to get your podcast seen is going to be a local wave, not a national one. Getting out in the city where you live and building interest and building recognition in the place where you live is going to be a ripple effect. People knowing who we are and what we do here in Minneapolis is starting to spread to other cities around us. And that's going to have an effect on spreading it to different states around us. We're actually seeing that. We're actually able to see that we're getting more reach, that we're getting a wider, berth, as it is. But that comes from actually doing the groundwork here and developing, and it's part of that. You'll wind up developing a network. You'll wind up developing, an opportunity with different people, and you'll wind up having like a crew of people that are now supporting the work that you do. When I put out an episode and people start signal boosting, it used to just be my friends, my Facebook friends, my mama, people like that. And now it's, people that I know in different businesses in the city, people that I know that are podcasters in different cities who are just amplifying the work. And it's getting bigger based on that. But it actually started in our own backyard, developing relationships with people here where we live in real time every day. And that's how you have to start building.
Okay, I'm going to try to answer a couple of things since we're getting close on time. There's one from Angel that says, I have 2 podcasts. Is it okay to showcase a whole episode from my new podcast on the more popular one, even though they are totally different? I would say yes.
Yes.
That's the
Yeah.
thing. Gimlet has always done that, or I've seen that, and that's how like they've gained things for their new shows. And like whether I like it or not, it works. So like it works. And to me, it wouldn't mind like putting that in your feed, even if you did like an intro thing or like, even a short spurt of like, this is how you get it. And one thing I'm telling people, always use your episode notes. Like if you're not on Anchor and you can put different links in your episode notes, like a lot of different things, link to that. Like make sure you say it in the other podcasts and make sure you like link on the bottom. There's a link in the bottom to the other episode that, I put in my feed a couple of weeks ago. But you can still check it out or send it to your friend. Apple and Spotify and things are in the thing, in there. So just always make sure you're linking, and you can like just say, you can go in the episode notes and just go click and go listen to that right after this instead of them trying to find it. Let's see. There was another one where Kim had said, what are your thoughts on the new podcast academy? And is there a way to elevate the industry trying to scale up to other media industries? I'm not against it. I would say there's things I can say and that I can't say. I'm not against it. The people behind it, I mean, I don't love everybody, but they did get some of the heads of industries of different things in it. And I do like Rika Murphy. She's helped me in many ways, and she works with Spotify, and she's a part of the board. And like, there's Jenna, and there's just like a few other people. There's Hernan with Wondery. So there are people of color like on there. Jenna's not. But like, I think that of course there's just going to be bumps in the road of how things are done, bumps in the road of how people feel about things as we're building something new. I feel like there's going to be a lot of different things that pop up, and it's going to be what actually is able to sustain itself and what people actually want to do. If it's all white or somehow like, all the people they pick are white in the background, it's just going to become a thing that PLC don't pay attention to, like in other things, and then end up trying to create something new to try to bring in to the people that are really going to chatter about podcasts. Because to me, this might sound weird. White people talk about podcasts, but it's almost like Twitter, that Black people are always going to do something and like say even more about it and like express about it and share about it and talk to their friends. And like, it's just going to be like an experience type of thing of like, no, you got to know about this. So I feel like when one of the things in podcasting that they're like, it's not hitting, that's not really doing the thing it is, and all that kind of stuff. And it's usually because Black people or even POC and podcasting aren't paying attention to it because you didn't include them, and they don't feel like trying to make you include them. And then you're trying to create something new again, because this isn't the first time somebody tried to create an academy, because you have to like try to include them, because that's where you're going to get your real thing from. What do you all?
Barry, I agree with you 110%. I find this, I'm eyeing it a little suspiciously, because there is a thing about when people from vaulted industry and who have name in the industry decide they want to teach other people how to do it. It's usually not teaching them how to podcast, it's teaching them how to emulate traditional media. And we don't fit into traditional media. The way that we tell stories, our narratives, the way that we talk, the way that we structure things, it's not what they do. And it immediately will become this thing where if you can't do it that way, then you're not doing it right. I want the process of being able to make podcasts to be far more democratized. It's why I do Women in Podcasting for free. It's why eventually we will take the stuff that we're teaching in Women in Podcasting and put it into modules that people can get access to, because I want people to be able to make podcasts based on the skill set and the talent and the life experience that they have, and not trying to emulate another model. Not trying to be square pegs that fit in round holes, right? You should be able, it's such a dynamic industry, you should be able to be yourself in full within the industry without using like, oh, you have to do it this way, when in traditional media they do this, or in podcasting we have to do it this way. It's all, a lot of that's bogus. Like I said, I hope that they are more thoughtful and considerate and welcoming and inclusive in how they are putting things together. It doesn't look like it yet. And until it looks more like it, I'm always going to kind of side eye it.
Okay, Renay, anything quick before we go to the next thing?
I have nothing on it.
Okay.
What?
Okay.
What?
Anyway, okay, Melissa asked, how do you outsource the skills and knowledge you need to find, like legal, financial, PR, if you feel you can't trust people as a minority voice. So like, I guess what she's saying is like, maybe how do you find people? Like, how do I know that that's the right attorney or like the right PR person or like, you know, to work with me to bring on my team to do things for me?
So with the first time I needed a lawyer was to do the Sony deal, and I got a suggestion from them, and I ended up not firing them because they just heard, oh, you're doing a deal with Sony, and I think just tried to rip me off, and I was like, you know, I have to pay for this. I'm not a millionaire. And then I found, and then another Sony lawyer recommended a different one, like did some research for me and recommended another one, and I basically found them and they agreed to like cap. I said, if we do the deal by this date and you cap your fee, like I will make this happen by this date. And basically it was like I just had to read everything, and I mean they're lawyers, like you can sue them if they don't tell you the truth, basically. that's the law. So basically I did read everything and they read through everything with me. And so I was really happy with my lawyers, but it was through recommendation. With PR, I tried one person at first, they didn't work out, and then I went with a smaller company woman, and she's Black, and I'm really happy, like she's awesome. I wouldn't, like Sony in the UK work with a company, but they don't have any Black employees, so I always said I wouldn't work with them. So that's why I've had to try and find my own, because I'm like, the person has to be able to sell me and like Broccoli, which is a Black-owned company, and I make diverse content, so they have to do that. And with when I found an accountant, which was like, if you start a business, that's my one thing, like have an accountant, because the reason why I was able to do my Sony deal is and not let it drag out on that side was because all my books were in order, because I had an accountant. And the reason I got an accountant straight away was because I just, in my head, like I'm ambitious, what can I say? Like I was like, I want to be able to scale quickly. And the only way you can scale quickly is to have your paperwork in order. And my accountant was through a recommendation as well.
Okay.
I believe in recommendations.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I believe in recommendations. Start with your own network. You might know people, family, friends, immediate contacts that can either recommend or help you initially get things up and running. You just pay them properly if that's their area of expertise. Always ask the person you're going to hire specific questions. One of the things I ask to see if they really can do the work I need them to do is to explain it to me like I'm a little kid. Because if you can't break down the information so that I can understand it as though I was one of my children, then you're probably going to not have the patience to work with me if something is more complex and I don't understand it and I'm paying money for the service. So you need to be able to explain it to me. And if you find the, even the ask of that too much for you, then we shouldn't be doing business together, plain and simple.
Okay. Last question, and then we'll have like 1 minute. What are your thoughts on children and young people leading on podcasts for change in working class communities with limited support? I support all young people. Like they're not gonna be young forever. Like they're growing up. So adults, and like getting them in an industry and starting them in something might spark something else. And so why not try? Like a lot of things are gonna be bootstrapped, and that's fine. It's finding a way to do it, seeing if you want to do it, and trying to make it work. Any other thoughts on that, really quick?
Be careful.
I didn't get them in. Oh, okay. Be careful.
I think getting them in is a good idea, but be careful because these podcasts are forward-facing businesses. And if you have your kid in a hosting position or on-air talent, that opens them up to the same scrutiny that you as an adult are opened up to in public. And there is nothing worse than people with stupid avatars attacking children. It makes me want to punch walls. So you do have to be really careful if you have a kid and you're putting your kid in that particular forward-facing position.
Okay, well, like we're about to cut off. I don't know if we're going to cut off, if it cuts us off at 2 or.
We shouldn't cut off, but I don't know that we won't.
Okay, just making sure you all know I will send an email tomorrow with the email you submitted to do this with information we talked about. If there's any links, like I'll link to the Work It podcast I mentioned. I do think you all should listen to Hernan's episode of Recode that just came out this past week. If you haven't, he really talks about how Wondery started, how they popped off and how it was bootstrapped and different things. I mean, he is under a Fed case. He mentions that. But like just more is talked about with that. And I just think that can help somebody maybe starting in podcasting learn that everybody that's a bigger network didn't always start with a big budget to get to where they are now. And I guess, in the comments, if you see anybody, feel free to share your social media to find each other. I'll send the email today should have had our social media on it, but of course I'll send that again tomorrow if you want to follow us or follow up with us. I'll link to anthems and I'm sorry.
She's busy, y'all. She's always busy.
You see how people do. But to link to the podcast that we do, like some of Matriarch, some of Anthem, and that sort of thing. Maybe I'll even link to what I've done. And I think to me, that's all I necessarily have to say. Oh, tomorrow, if you didn't catch it, Twila will be doing a Women in Podcasting thing. You can find a link to the Eventbrite on her Twitter, on Matriarch's Twitter, I believe on the Facebook. So any of those things to sign up for that. I'll be back tomorrow for that when she does this. And you can always ask your questions. Sorry if we didn't get to it then. Did you guys have anything else to say?
No, thank you.
And dream big. Go for it. Ask for more money.
Listen, we all listen.
More
We all
money. Isn't that the thing? Ask for more money.
get paid for your work. And now we all know that when the time comes for our ship to come in, Renay didn't have somebody to ask, but now we can ask Renay because we know she's
true. I've done it now, guys.
And then like just to bring this up that we're over, and I'm not sure if people saw this on Twitter, but I'll probably tweet about it either today or tomorrow, depending. I'm a little busy. But the Overcast app, I am in there now in the Podcast and Color section. I do appreciate that. I take the least, so I didn't even ask for anything when he did that, which I'm sure a lot of people would be offended to know. He did subscribe to my Patreon, and it was $100 a month. That's public. Anybody can see that. But he also, like last night, I don't know if you all saw, I said this. He also sent something, and I'm not going to say the amount, but it's the most I have ever received from anybody, another message of just saying he listened to the last podcast episode I did. He understood that people don't necessarily, he's the only person that works on Overcast, which I knew that. You can listen to the Wolfden episode on Stitcher with Marco of Overcast, and he talks about deeper things. But I just want to say that, he did come through. He did pull up, as Rihanna said. Things. And so I do appreciate that because really, for me, I've always wanted to be in a podcast app as a section or have something like that. So people can go directly to Podcasts of Color. They don't necessarily need to search or, other things like that and to be included. So one thing, no matter what came out of this, and I don't even care if I got a dime, the fact that all of these podcast apps are paying attention, they are putting more Black faces in front of us. They're putting more POC faces in front of us from all over the world. I feel like that's something that most people don't understand because I've pressed that so hard. Usually it's been a section. Usually it's only been between Black History Month. I have done so much behind that I was just like, I feel like I wish I had a team or something so we could have all been like, look at what just happened. Like, look at you can go to almost any screen right now and find the faces that you should have been finding. And it's sad that it took this long to break it out. But I'm like, the fact that it's even happening and we've been able to put the pressure on, I've appreciated that. No.
Well, I'm proud of y'all. Y'all know I got no business being as proud. I'm not your mamas, but I'm proud of y'all. So thank you.
Well,
thank you for always including me.
I wouldn't have thought about the child thing, and maybe you don't want to put your child in front of other people to be dragged on the internet. I wouldn't have thought about that.
Internet trolls, yeah. Oh.
Oh yeah, that stuff does happen. But maybe we'll try this again, or I'll try with other people. Thank you all for doing this with me. I feel like Tyler and Renay, we talk about things, as you can see, in a circle of ways of having a different side of it, a different opinion, seeing something different of no, this is why this doesn't work for me, or this does work for me. So hope you all enjoyed. And come back again if we do this. Pay attention.
Yeah.
All right.
See y'all tomorrow. Y'all gotta come back tomorrow.
Guys.
Bye guys. Thank you, ladies. Thank you.
Bye.